So thank you for joining. I'm excited that this is, we do this twice a year, and this is our 10th time of sharing the state of science with all of you and with the world. So let's just do some introductions and then we can get into what this topic is about. My name is Hamid Ganadan. I am the CEO of Linus. Linus is a consultancy that works exclusively in life science and healthcare. And we do lots of product launches. We help with growth. We do a lot of market research and insight work. And it is really a pleasure for us to share with all of you the data that we capture on a semi-annual basis. Well, I'll talk more about it. Jared, do you want to introduce yourself? And maybe let's go to the next slide.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Hamid. My name is Jared Martinez. I'm a strategist here at Linus. I've been working with Hamid and the team to draft this survey and field all of the results. I'm looking forward to sharing everything that we have with all of you.
Thanks. So, Jared, this is your third time doing this with us, right? I believe
Yes.
this is your third. So, Jared and I get really deep into this data together, and we really talk about what's happening and really get an on the ground feeling for all of this. So, let's just give you a quick overview of what it is that we're going to talk about. I'll give a quick executive summary, and then we'll walk through the different sections that we have for you. Along the way, if you have questions, please use the Q&A portion of this. So type in the questions, and if Jared is presenting, I'll be monitoring. If I'm presenting, Jared is going to be monitoring, and we will stop and answer questions along the way, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end as well. So as I mentioned before, this is our 10th time doing this. And what we really notice is that most of the industry has a fairly decent market sizing and market growth that they focus on when they're looking at their long range projections, but they don't really know what's happening right now. And that information is usually either comes anecdotally from what they hear from what the sales team or as they go into conferences and set the mood and the tone, but they don't really have a rigorous or a quantitative way of doing this. And so we found that measuring consumer confidence and consumer sentiment in the life sciences to be really actionable for a lot of our clients. And so that's why we started to measure this. We measure it usually at the beginning of the year and then mid-year to really calibrate what's happening. And we'll share with you some of this longitudinal data that we've captured so that you can get a sense for, okay, well, if people said that they were feeling this way in 2025, and we already know what happened economically, then I can really calibrate what they're saying and feeling in 2026 and calibrate moving forward. So that's really what this is. We always engage a global cohort of scientists as respondents. And as you'll see, I'll walk through who our respondents were this time, and then we can talk about this. So let's really focus on 2026 with special emphasis on the first half of the year. I just want to remind you, and this has actually been verified with every economist that you talk to. Consumer sentiment and consumer confidence does not dictate whether people buy stuff. And that's true in the life sciences as well. They can feel downtrodden, but that doesn't stop them from actually buying things. It does make a difference and dictates how they buy. And so this information is really actionable to you in how you actually develop your products and services, how you go to market, how you sell. And so this is the information that we have for you. And just to give you a quick top line, there's three really big opportunities this year. So one is all about trust. And so you're going to want to focus in on those sections when Jared's talking about where trust is, because we saw a big difference between how scientists trust the literature, how they trust each other, how they trust the community, and how they trust vendors and suppliers. And we see an unmistakable opportunity there for every life science tools and services supplier. The second one is you'll see that the sort of the recessionary downtroddenness of the last 2 years is starting to make a turn. Everyone's still cautious, but they're definitely making a turn for the better. And they're also very optimistic about their productivity. There's renewed optimism about productivity. And that is really the most healthy and positive sign that we see going into the market. And then the third is it's all about automation and AI and automation. So however you think about your products and services, those are top of mind for the people who are in the market and buying from you. So those are the three opportunities we'll walk through, more detail with you with all the data. So who do we talk to? Again, we always take a global cohort. This time it is skewed more toward North America, but there's a healthy representative of from Europe, and then rest of world APAC is the remaining 10% of our respondents. So pretty typical. And it's 50% academic and 50% industry. And industry is, pharma, biotech, contract organizations, non-therapeutic biotech companies, manufacturing companies. 4% are hospital and 10% are other. And other is usually some flavor of industry. And so just wanted to give you a sense. Generally speaking, we think of this data and we always try to meet quotas of half academia and industry. So you'll see this. If there is a difference between those, we have broken those out in the data set. If we haven't broken it out, it's because they were either not statistically significant or not really that meaningful. So we will break it out geographically and by these two different sort of industry types, as it were. The last thing is we always ask this question, and we actually have our own proprietary way of asking this question, of trying to get as close as possible for people to really tell us where they are in the technology adoption curve. Now, again, lots of disclaimers here, but you can see here that 23% of our respondents claimed that they were innovators. And that's statistically impossible because the technology adoption curve is a normal distribution. And so that means that there's either a sampling bias or there's a pro-innovation bias. And so I think both of those are at play. Pro-innovation bias is people think of themselves as more innovative than they are. And so that's just something to keep in mind. And nobody, the 3% who actually raised their hand and said, I'm a laggard, God bless them, but I think most people think of themselves as being on the front half of this curve. That is not actually true in real life. Okay, now let's dive into the barriers and trust.
Awesome. Thank you, Hamid. So as we're thinking about the barriers and trust, there's a couple different things at play here. One of the big things that we've seen over the last couple iterations of the State of Science survey is that this politicalization of scientific topics is a strong barrier facing science today. And we see that again as we enter 2026. And this is some of the lens that we are looking at trust through. So as we're looking at trust, we had asked about trust in vendors. We asked about trust of the public in science. And then we asked about trust in terms of the communities. And we're seeing a little bit of variance here, but overall, we're seeing strong trust in vendors. People over 70% are saying that they trust their vendors to deliver the promised value in the coming year. In terms of the public trust, this is starting to bounce back. It was a little bit on the lower side the last time we met with you all and shared these results, but we're seeing a little bit of a rebound here. And then one of the other things that we often ask are, what are some of the emotions that scientists and people are feeling in the market as they're entering the new year? And we're seeing a little bit more optimism and excitement, specifically within the APAC region, whereas fear starts to become a little bit higher in Europe. So let's dive into what we saw. As I had mentioned, the politicalization of scientific topics is a number one barrier. This is something that we've seen steadily rise since 2024, but this is the first time that we've actually started to see a slight decline in the number of people that are citing this as a barrier. So that is a little bit of an optimistic way of looking at things. Things are starting to take a turn. And so as we're thinking about some of these political concerns, obviously trust becomes very important. People are looking for trustworthy sources of information. They're looking for trustworthy peers and community members. And so that's what we're seeing. There's a little bit of difference here in terms of academia and biopharma in terms of what they look at for trusted sources of information. But by and large, the thing that we hear consistently is that scientific publications, specifically the peer-reviewed publications, are the number one trusted source. People mention that this is the ability of having others kind of verifying and peer reviewing these publications is of the utmost importance to them and builds the most trust in the content that they are kind of consuming. Academia starts to look a little bit more within their community. So as you see, their professional network and professional associations are the other two top trustworthy sources, whereas biopharma starts to look a little bit more toward the industry events and also some of those in their network. The one thing I do want to mention here is that the trust within both of these are starting to seep out of just the specific sources and starting to seep into the relationships and into the community. So we dug into that a little bit more. And we tried to understand what that looks like. Is it trust within your specific community, or is it trust in terms of the entire scientific community? And we see a bit of a delta here. We're seeing a 20% gap between the trust of scientists within their specific community versus the outside community. Although the trust is strong, I would say people are continuing to look within their specific network. They're looking to kind of to their trusted peers for these specific pieces of information. Oh, Hamid, I think you're muted right now.
Sorry. If you go back one slide, let's actually unpack this for just another minute. I would look at the negatives of these numbers as well. So of course, 89% of the academics believe and trust scientific publications, but what about the other 11%? Like, if they're not saying publications are in their top three, that's a gap, right? That's 11%. That's 1 out of 10 academic who says that they don't trust publications. Biopharma is the same thing, but they've actually felt the reproducibility problem a little bit more. So that makes a lot of sense. But look at the other two numbers. 35% of the respondents don't think of their professional network as a trustworthy source. And same thing, 44% of them, they also don't trust professional associations as a trusted source. Same thing in biopharma. People don't even trust their own organizational colleagues. 49% don't trust their own colleagues in their own organization. So trust is really something that is basically all the deck chairs are shifting. And one of the numbers that's fairly solid is their suppliers. And so just wanted to point that out because the numbers can be a little deceiving. You see 80, 90%, you're like, okay, trust is pretty solid. But what about the rest?
And so Hamid had just kind of mentioned this, but trust in vendors is strong. So we had asked on a scale, what is your level of trust in your primary vendors that they will deliver on the promised value in the coming 12 months? And what we're seeing is the overwhelming majority of respondents agree with this sentiment. They believe that their vendors will continue to deliver the value that they are advertising and that they are kind of promising to their customers. The one thing that I do want to caveat here is that biopharma versus academia, there is a little bit of a shift here. Biopharma actually overemphasizes on this trust. They over-index here. They are even more trustworthy than academia. And so we dug into this a little bit further and tried to understand what is driving this. And so, unsurprising, relationships. This is the cornerstone of trust and past experience. So people are expressing that if they have strong, long-lasting relationships with these vendors, it is much more likely that they will continue to trust these vendors. So as vendors are continuing to think about this and think about as they're engaging with their customers, they need to continue to leverage their sales and marketing folks to continue to build and maintain these relationships. It can no longer be kind of a one-way conversation. It needs to be a two-way conversation to maintain these relationships and continue to drive and build this trust. Again, kind of consistent, reliable performance. This isn't surprising as well. People want to maintain this trust in the product, in the vendor, and then being able to have the technical support and timely responsiveness as they're engaging with their vendors. These two, again, numbers 3 and 4 were very high within biopharma. In terms of public trust, I had mentioned this a little bit before, but we're starting to see a little bit of a shift back. Last year, we had seen a dip in terms of the expected trust of the public in science, but we're starting to see that right itself now. And then lastly, about some of those emotions that I had mentioned earlier. So we had asked a variety of different emotions and asked people to express what they are feeling today and how they're looking at the state of science and looking to the future. Fear, this was something that's peaked the last time we spoke with you, but it is starting to come down a little bit. There are some regional differences here, as I mentioned before. It's a little bit higher in Europe, but overall, there's a little bit of a shift more toward these positive emotions, optimism, motivation, excitement. These are the things that are starting to creep up and become more widespread, especially within the biopharma and APAC markets. And so, as to kind of pull all of this together, we like I had mentioned before, the politicalization of scientific topics, this is a key barrier. And because of this, people are looking for those trustworthy sources. They're really trying to dig into those and maintain those trusted sources. The peer-reviewed journals that we had touched on, the communities, all of these things are very important now to those that are in the scientific community. And vendors must be able to really drive that trust and that reliability with their constituents and with their customers, especially within biopharma. This is really, really important. So vendors that are able to kind of embed themselves into the scientific communities and really help provide and defensible value for their products and services will start to outperform those that are relying simply on their brand and some of the historic performance that they have.
Jared, two questions are coming in. I think we should address them now. The first one is how trust is defined here, and even more specifically, whether it's trust in the individual relationships or trust and credibility from vendors. And it's actually both. Whoever asked this question, it's actually both. So I believe that the respondents were talking about brands because that's who they tend to do business with. But you can't really, a brand is not an abstraction, it's actually a group of people. And so the brand becomes realized when you're talking to your sales rep, when you're talking to your service engineer, and so on. And so you can't really tease those apart. And we know that there's a lot of stories around sales reps moving from one brand to the other, and where that how that manifests in the longevity of the relationship. The second question is, can you give an example of the politicization that you are seeing? And this is not specific, and nor did we ask this to our respondents. They basically just chose that science is becoming politicized. But one example is a lot of the fervor and a lot of the rhetoric that was really spoken about in 2025 about grants being canceled because they were, of a particular nature, or they were looking at, that they maybe had resonances of certain ideologies and so on. I will tell you, and I don't think this made huge news, but as you all know, in the U.S., the fiscal year ends on September 30th. And so September 30th of 2025 was actually a key moment, because even though grants were down and many people lost grant money, they actually overall, the NIH pushed out and funded 98 point, I think, 7% of their 2025 fiscal budget in grants. And so there was a lot of catch up, and there's a flurry of activity into the academic world with grants going out. So again, a lot of shuffling of deck chairs, but grants did get doled out, and the money did flood into our economy. Thank you for the questions.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, back to you, Jared.
So next, we want to talk a little bit about some of the economic outlook. But before we get there, a couple of key indicators. So we're seeing that the economic outlook is starting to rebound. We're seeing a shift. We're seeing more sort of stability, more growth. This is expected to continue into 2026, and as a rebound from some of the lows that we saw the last time we spoke in July. North American markets actually are the ones that are driving a lot of this economic expectation, specifically around this growth, whereas APAC is expecting a little bit more of that stabilization and not a ton of change. Looking at budgets, in terms of the expectations around budgets, we're seeing a double in terms of the amount of people that are expecting their budgets to increase in the coming 6 months. But by and large, when we're looking at productivity, this is where we're seeing a super big jump, specifically around biopharma. So, although there is a little bit of uncertainty, although there is a little bit of a turning a corner, biopharma is really exploding in terms of their expected productivity. And so, as we're looking at the economic outlook, we're seeing, like I had mentioned, a shift. Last time we spoke, there was a much larger portion of the respondents that were expecting some form of recession, specifically the dark gray deep recession. That was much, much larger the last time we spoke. But as we're seeing today, there's been a shift in terms of that stability and that growth. So that kind of light teal 22% number is much higher than it was last we spoke. And so there is a little bit more optimism in the economic outlook of the future. So we want to look back, as I had mentioned, last time we spoke, the recessionary outlooks were a little bit over 70%, whereas now they're a little bit under 60. So a 13-point difference there. And we're also seeing a 6-point difference in terms of this growth. So we're not quite back to the 2023, 2024 numbers, but we're heading in that direction.
And 2024 was not a banner year by any means. But I'll just say, again, this is the 10th survey that we've done. And although the data don't show this, there has always been this feeling, a pervasive feeling in the market that we're about to hit a recession. That's nothing that surprises us. There's nothing that scares us. It's really the optimism and the growth that we look at. And so you can see the 20% number is healthy-ish, and it's still not the kind of the COVID highlights or the pre-COVID, free-flowing money kinds of numbers, but it's not bad. And so we are calling for modest growth this year. So.
In terms of the differences between academia and biopharma, again, we're seeing some more of that modest growth, but people are not expecting things to be as bad as what they were last year. So that academic number in terms of the recession, this has fallen by almost 16 points. So we're seeing that shift more toward the right here of that stability and that growth, specifically in academia. Last we spoke, people were very concerned about recession. They were very concerned about budgets. But as Hamid had mentioned, with the NIH and some of the changes in terms of the political climate and the news, we're seeing things kind of shift, and there's a new sense of optimism as the market is progressing. And then looking at some of those different regional differences, as I'd mentioned before, North America really is driving a lot of this growth. Over 20% of the respondents are expecting some form of either slight or significant growth in Q1 and 2. And whereas APAC is expecting a little bit more of that stability here. As we were looking at the differences in terms of the expectations around budgets and the reality, we're seeing that many more people are expecting budgets to be rising. So these expectations are actually shifting a little bit more toward that optimism. We're expecting more money to be available, which is obviously a good thing. So people are a little bit less concerned about the decline and a little bit more around the optimism and looking to the future. But this is one of the things that really was surprising and very, very optimistic for us. We were looking at productivity, and despite some of the economic kind of uncertainty, productivity is expected to rise both within academia and in biopharma. And specifically within biopharma, almost 50% are expecting some form of higher form of productivity. Specifically in that 43, that's a really large number. But when we're looking at across the board, about the same, somewhat higher and significantly higher, we're seeing the vast majority of people are expecting to maintain the status quo or even become more productive. And then looking at regional differences as well. So across all geographies, this is sentiment continues. People are expecting to be more productive, specifically within APAC. That's where the big boom is happening. So that productivity jumps within APAC. But by and large, over 40% of all markets are expecting some form of increased productivity. And so, as some of those recessionary expectations are easing, people are beginning to kind of look forward. The budget outlooks are strengthening. Productivity is really expected to rise as well. So these signals are kind of shifting away from that kind of pause and wait from what we saw the last time we spoke in July of 2025 toward some form of disciplined expansion. People are looking to move forward and slowly start to do more with some of the things that they have available. And Hamid is going to follow up right after this to talk a little bit more about some of that purchasing to see where people are looking for the future in terms of some of that expansion. But vendors really must try to find a way to support some of this expansion, really give confidence to these customers that are trying to be diligent and disciplined in terms of how they're beginning to grow and move forward.
So just a couple of questions that have come in, and thank you everybody for putting all these great questions in. There's a question about how important is a salesperson in biopharma, and we again that's not relevant to this data set, so we can't really answer that question right now. But if whoever asked it, if you want to have an offline conversation, we're happy to have it with you about the role and the importance of salespeople in biopharma. Another question actually came in through email. From somebody I know who asked, can you give examples of how vendors are connecting with the community? We do have lots of examples, but we don't have data, so we're not going to share it in this particular webinar, and we're happy to follow up with you on that. Jim asks about the 98.7%. Please don't quote me on that number because it was just off the top of my head. And I don't remember which institutes actually got funded. So that was a great question, like which institutes actually within the NIH got funded. So I will dig up the actual report, Jim, and I'll send it to you. So I'll do that. So Kathy asks, what is contributing to higher productivity in their eyes? Is it more staff, new products, become more efficient? Thank you, Kathy. That's actually the next section. So we will dive right into that immediately. Yeah, there's just more questions about like defining what do we mean by productivity. Let's dive into all of that in just a little bit. We actually used to ask this question, what does productivity mean to you? And the answers were similar every single time, so we didn't actually ask it this time around. But I'll share it right now just from memory. If you're in academia, productivity to you means getting grants and getting publications and the number of in that direction. If you're in biopharma, it means whether you met a milestone. A lot of it has to do with milestones. So, how many drugs are in which stages of the pipeline? Are we meeting our expectations? Very few of them were like, oh, number of samples run or number of experiments finished or anything. So they're really looking at outcomes as a measure of their productivity. And I think it's actually a really healthy way to think about this. So we're happy that most people have that set. So we ask them what productivity means to you, and then we ask them to measure productivity. So let's go on and actually talk about purchase behavior here because there's a little bit more on productivity here as well. Okay, so some key indicators. Purchasing new equipment, we always ask, are you planning on purchasing new equipment in 2025? It's more or less flat from the second half of 2025. But again, remember, sentiment and intent doesn't actually translate to what they did. And as far as we see, so many public companies actually showed third quarter and fourth quarter growth. Some of that was price increases, some of it was due to tariffs, but some of it was actually volume. And so there was more activity when you look back than the stated number, and it's going to stay flat for the first half of 2026. Automation and robotics. The story is about automation and robotics, and there's a very tight one-to-one correlation with AI intent. So please keep that in mind. 51% of the scientists who say that they're purchasing new equipment, it's either to replace or upgrade existing capital equipment. But 85% plan to stay steady or increase purchasing of reagents. So that's really the indicator for productivity. How much juice is running through those pipette tips? How many pipette tips are you using? Though that is really sort of number of samples, which is an indicator for all of you because I'm guessing that's what you sell. And going on. There is one question from my friend Andy, Jared, before we go, and it's about the APAC statement that you made about optimism. Anything that you can share there? Where is that 8% located? Is it China? Is it India? Is it all of the above?
It was all of the above,
Okay,
primarily in China, but a kind of spattering across APAC as well.
got it. Andy, we can follow up with you on the details of that because we actually captured on the on a company level. Okay, so let's dive in more a little bit into purchasing intent. Again, we asked this question, do you plan to purchase new technologies for your work this year? You see that the first half of 2026, this survey is at 40%. It's relatively low. It looks like second half intentions. Usually our first half numbers are higher. And so it just looks like it's a continuation of what's been happening since July, since the last time that we shared these data. And so 40% are planning on making new capital equipment purchases. What are they planning on buying, or why are they planning on buying it? And so 51%, so half of those people say that I'm replacing or upgrading existing piece of capital equipment. 39% are buying additional pieces of capital equipment. 25%, so a quarter, one out of every four respondents said that they're really looking at purchasing large analytics or software packages. So that is a point toward AI. And then 22% are basically adding to their capabilities with novel capital equipment. Of those who are looking for novel capital equipment, automation and robotics was the number one thing that they wanted. Number two was machine learning or AI-enabled bioinformatics. And number three was generative AI. So we don't mean ChatGPT here. Generative AI is usually in these markets, it's usually structure prediction, AlphaFold, Schrodinger, like those kinds of software programs that predict molecules or predict the path forward. And so that's where a lot of the purchasing is happening right now. And I get asked this all the time. So there may be a question that somebody's typing right now. So I'll just save you from typing it. Is there a trust in AI now in the sciences? And are people actually moving into this? And again, we have longitudinal data on this. So the sentiment really changed in 2022. So prior to that, there was a lot of interest in AI, but it was top down. It was driven from sort of pressure from top down. There was a board member saying, "Oh, what's our AI strategy? We need an AI strategy." And there was generally resistance among the scientists that are working. And we saw this a lot, that a lot of the barriers that they felt was that the expectations of AI are inflated. That subsided. That started to change in 2023. And now they all believe that they need to embrace this strategy. And so, or they need to embrace AI and develop strategies around it is the more accurate way of saying it. So people who basically say that they're not buying. Why are they not buying? What are the challenges there? And again, we actually said, let's exclude funding. We understand funding is the obvious barrier here. So we just, again, because everyone's going to want to talk about funding, and that's not interesting to us. But lack of internal alignment or support from my organization. That's really key. We actually heard anecdotally from salespeople and marketers that we work with that companies in 2025 or even academic institutions were funded, but they decided to not move forward because of internal strife or just lack of alignment. And so this is something that is actionable for all of you because you can actually help bring that alignment together. We do a lot of sales training. We talk to sales management about this. and we're giving a lot of sales teams tools and ways to navigate around this gauntlet so that there's not institutional inertia in buying products. Lack of expertise to analyze the data and generate meaningful results was number two. It was also tied with lack of internal expertise to run and upkeep the technology. This is a world that's becoming increasingly multi-omic, and lack of expertise to either run novel instrumentation or to analyze the data is really a big barrier. And then sort of number three, which is the fourth one, is just the time that it takes to install and verify and train and basically bring a novel technology online. They're just so busy. And so that's a big barrier. So the need may be there, the money may even be there, they just don't have the time. So the more you can help that, the more you can reduce that burden, the better off you're going to be. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we also ask about reagents, lab chemicals, consumables, everyday lab products, because it's really a good sense for how much productivity is going to be running through those pipette tips. And so you're going to want to focus on the yellow bars here because that's the most recent survey. And comparing them to the green bars, which was our July numbers, you can see here stay the same or slightly increase is actually fairly positive. 25, I think it's 26% of the people are looking at increases, whether it's slight to significant. It's still the expectation on decreases is also there, but the fact that people are looking at numbers staying the same is actually, we see that as a positive, as a positive movement. There's a big difference in academia, though. Academia was really like in low morale mode in July of 2025 when we took the survey, actually June of 2025 when we took the survey. You can see here the green bars in that stay the same really dropped or somewhat decreased was really up. Academia is coming back. They're gaining that sense of optimism again. They were really pessimistic, but they're coming back. So if you think that academia is just to be ignored, I think you would miss an opportunity here. Because again, remember the funding that happened in September. So that money is actually getting into the market now. And academia's sentiment is that things are actually okay and they're moving forward. Biopharma was, I would say that they were more kind of grounded and measured all along. They didn't get as flustered about what was happening. And so the numbers are slightly, more or less the same, but a little bit less as far as the amount of increase that they're going to see. So again, they didn't see that much of a decrease in 2025, and so they're a little bit more like, okay, we may have to do more with less here. And so just to sort of double click on biopharma's growth here, the purchase inhibitors, obviously funding, but also not having the staff to process as many samples. The cost of reagents, so there's this expectation that costs are going to go up. And so that is a purchase inhibitor for them. So if you're not planning on increasing your costs, communicate that with your community of customers. And then also just this idea that they're going to use more services. And so outsourcing to third parties. So again, if you have a way of processing samples, I think that you would find a little bit more growth there in the short term. I know many companies, Olink was a great example before they got bought by Thermo. I don't know if they're still doing it or not, but they realized that a major barrier to entry for them was the high cost of capital. And so they actually had a service lab where you could send them your samples and they would run it for you because it was such a novel data set, and enough people wanted it, but they didn't want it enough to spend that much money. And so they were able to capture market share that way. The purchase drivers are new studies. Obviously, a new study requires either new or more data collection, automation of processes. And so they're looking at how to increase and maximize their throughput. They've just purchased a new technique, and so that adds to their overall workflow, and so they're buying more. and then restocking or stocking a new lab or new facilities. So those are the major drivers in biopharma. Just want to point out, whereas the inhibitors are lack of staff, one of the main drivers is automation. So if this is not robotics taking jobs, I don't know what is. But I also do believe that there's a happy medium here. And, and these companies are flip-flopping. They can't really not do without expertise. So that is something that is clear here. But they are looking at sort of getting rid of more manual processes. So again, steady as she goes. It's still conservative, but I think that the focus on either incremental upgrades, replacement of equipment, and then automation, especially in biopharma. In academia, there's a bigger appetite for more throughput of their of the experiments, and so don't ignore your academic market. I think that this is going to come back. Um, Operational efficiency. You have to talk about operational efficiency, doing more with less, how your assay or how your products can either are automatable or have become automated, or just some path toward that is key. That's not to say that you yourself, if you have an endpoint detection system, that you have to have a high throughput system or you're out of the game. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that just really talking about the operational efficiency, how easy it is to install, how easy it is to bring online, and how you are willing and able to sort of hold their hand in order to minimize any disruption or minimize any inefficiencies. Time to value, I think, is really going to be key, and we recommend that you focus on that as part of your value proposition. All right, so let's keep the questions coming here. We already sort of talked about the idea of the expectation of being more productive. We talked about productivity. There's one question: is it a really top-down driven pressure, or people believe that they will be more productive? I mean, we asked across the board, so we do actually have people's our respondents' seniority. So we could potentially go back and look to see if it's the more senior people who are expecting higher productivity and the less senior people. I don't believe that we saw a statistical difference, which means that all of our respondents kind of have embraced the idea of productivity. So thank you for that question. And then there's another question. Many manual processes associated with sample processing and throughput include manual data and experiment plan transcriptions. Is workflow automation truly about robots, or is it about workflows that eliminate tasks that don't contribute to value? So from my friend Ben, that's very, very astute. I think when people think of this, they think of the robots and moving liquids around. But when you actually have a deep conversation with them, they take the entire experimental workflow into consideration. So even the idea generation, all the way down to communication. So we have another study that we've done that we're happy to do an executive briefing for anybody, which is really to think how automation and AI is infiltrated the entirety of the experimental workflow, from where ideas get generated until it gets communicated. And we're actually seeing some really interesting and deep movements there. So if anybody's interested in that study, please contact us, and we're happy to share that with you. So thank you for that question. Okay, 2026 expectations. Where are things going to be? Some key indicators. 50% are cite applying for new sources of funding. So there's, again, they would not do this out of desperation. Maybe some of them are doing it out of desperation, but they're also looking at this to basically prepare going into 2026 in order to meet their own productivity goals. So government grants are, within the top two sources of funding, obviously. So they're really rotating back toward the government a lot. And again, remember, this is global. So they're looking at their governments for money, and then biopharma organizations as well. So then AI-enabled bioinformatics, generative AI, are the most impactful scientific technology. So when we ask, What is the most impactful this year? AI takes the crown. And then the confidence that 88% actually, which is fairly high, believe that they'll meet their productivity goals in 2026. To us, that is the consumer confidence number. To us, that is the economic confidence number. So if 88% are feeling good about this and moving toward meeting their productivity goals, that there's going to be action that they're going to take in order to get there. So let's dive in a little bit more to the data. So again, 3 ways to prepare for 2026. In academia, 65% are applying for new sources of funding. 34% are delaying purchases of new technology to next year. So not great news for us. But 27% are actually increasing the funding amounts in the grants. So if the top thing that they're doing is more shots on goal, they're also putting more power in all of those shots to try to get more money as they're applying for grants. So they're really rotating toward making sure that their economic stability is there, but they're also being more conservative in buying new tech. Remember what I said about the reagents and consumables, though. So that's where academia is focusing in on. Biopharma is also looking at new funding, either whether it's venture capital or grants, 37%, so not nearly as many because they are feeling more stable in their funding. 35% are delaying purchases of new tech until next year, but 32% are actually automating more protocols and workflows. So that's the sentiment going into 2026 from these two sides of the market. Finally, we just want to talk about in-house versus out-of-house techniques. So top in-house techniques, what are you planning on keeping? We asked 2 questions. What are you planning on bringing in-house? And what are you planning on outsourcing? So top in-house techniques are routine assays and analyses, primary research and target identification and assay development. They're doing this in-house. And top outsourced, it was a little bit different between academia and biopharma. The academics actually talked about regulatory support. The biopharma talked about manufacturing and clinical trial design. They have to do that. So it makes a lot of sense. But again, if you're a service provider that's just doing sort of really, really routine work, you have to look for where there's burden either upstream or downstream of what you do and offer that as value add or as additional services. Because if it's just routine, they're going to want to bring it in-house, and chances are they're going to want to automate it. Okay, so I alluded to this. We always ask, and the full list here is like 18 or 20 things. Basically, what's going to make the biggest impact to life science in 2026? You can see here again, machine learning for AI-enabled bioinformatics. So the endpoint of the wet experiments, generative AI. The starting point of wet experiments, those are number 1 and number 2. These have consistently been number 1 and number 2, but they flipped around since 2023. Multiomic investigations is number 3. Multiomics has kind of been in the top 5 for a very long time. We were actually surprised that it was number 3. We thought it would be either personalized medicines or CRISPR, but that's not the case at all. It's multiomics because, and again, we think that there's an AI undertone to this, is that the more data sets that they can bring into an AI environment to really understand multifaceted biology, I think that's where the market's going in this. Personalized therapeutics is number 4. Organoids and 3D cell culture is number 5. And again, FDA in the US, FDA Modernization Act with NAMs, new alternative methods, I think, or models. So organoids and 3D cell culture that can represent living systems is number 5. Automation and robotics tied that for 5th place. Okay, so that was about science. Then we asked them, what are you planning on doing? What's happening in your lab? And it used to be that there was a giant disparity between how they felt about AI and what they were planning on doing themselves about AI. That gap is closing significantly. So finding new collaborations and external partners, that there's two main reasons for that. That's number one, and there's two main reasons for that. One is funding, and the other one is that idea of bringing more expertise, again, presumably around AI, bioinformatics, or multiomics investigations. So just really looking at friends and family here to really increase the power of these studies, increase the ability to understand multifaceted studies. Adopting machine learning or AI is number two. It also jumped from July by 3 points. And then adopting new techniques to acquire new types of data, it stayed more or less flat and went down by 1 point, not statistically significant, 35%. So those are the top three priorities that they individually are seeing. Let's also look at number four and number five. Processing more samples to generate more data. Academia over-indexed by 18 points here. So again, remember what we said about they are absolutely looking at running more juice through their pipettes, whether it's a liquid handler or a manual pipette or whatever it is. They are actually looking at increasing volume by significant amounts. Do not forget your academic customers. And then automating more techniques or processes. Here, biopharma over indexes by 14 points. So don't forget that sort of automation story as you're going into talking with them. So that's essentially what their particular priorities are in 2026. So again, we talked about this. I think there's not really much to be said here, but the percent prioritizing new sources of funding out of that 48% that are looking for collaborations, as I mentioned, it's bifurcated. So I think we already kind of covered this, but half of them are, there was an overlay between people who are looking for new sources of funding and looking for collaborations or external partners. Okay, so there was a question about sources of funding, and here it is. So I'm answering this live. Thank you, Joe, for your question. In academia, 96% are looking to their government, whether it's federal, national, or regional governments. 65% are looking at institutional or internal funding. So these are, universities, hospitals, maybe other kinds of institutional funding. And then 61% are looking at nonprofit or foundation grants. These are like your Gates, your Allen Institute, your HHMIs, Sanger, Wellcome Trust, and Max Planck. Those are the kinds of nonprofit or foundation grants. In biopharma, it's a little bit different. So industry partnerships and sponsorships, that's where they're looking for this. 63% are actually looking for government grants. This should not surprise you, but don't think NIH. Think ARPA-H, think DARPA. Those are phenomenal sources of funding, and the terms of that funding is really pro-innovation and pro-business. And so it makes a lot of sense for biopharma to look at those sources of funding. And in fact, if you're looking to sell to these companies, maybe look at who's getting that kind of grant funding, and maybe even get involved in some of those DARPA, ARPA-H, and maybe in other countries, similar kind of pro-innovation kinds of funding. And then 54% are looking at venture capital. So venture capital is not the only game here for funding in biopharma. Again, the final point on consumer confidence. 88% are saying that I'm certain, very highly confident, or moderately confident that I'm going to meet my productivity goals in 2025. That's a good sign for us. And we believe that this is really going to posture in a positive manner for all of you in 2026. Sorry, in 2026 should be the number here. That's I think we just forgot to update the date. There's a 9-point disparity between academia and biopharma. Biopharma is even 9 points, higher than academia in their confidence in meeting their numbers. How does this actually feel from a historical perspective? So the 88% is in line again with the second half numbers that we've seen in 2025. So everyone's still focusing on just being a little bit better than what they saw the second half of 2025. And that is actually going to show for us. We believe that there's going to be a slight increase in the overall sort of GDP of our market, as it were. We've even cross-referenced this with several economic outlooks, and they're, maybe a 1.5% higher, growth this year to 2% growth of the overall market. Now, that's in the prior years, that would be nothing to jump out of your seat around. That just sounds like a rounding error. But given the fact that 23 was flat, 24 was negative, and 25 was negative, if I were you, I'd take the 1.5 to 1.3 or 1.75% growth because, and I would actually prepare for it. So I heard another economist that I spoke at a conference, and he spoke either right before me or right after me, and he actually had a cautionary tale. He said, uh, "Expect to be busier," and so that means that if you had a layoff, you're not going to be able to meet demand in 2026. So be prepared for it. Make sure that your supply chain is prepared for it, and you move forward that way. So we're seeing this again. It's still not it's not just sort of free money and champagne flowing out of the tap, but it's not as bad. It seems like we've gone through the worst of the shock, and then we can start to look for modest growth. And that's a really positive thing that we have to say here. But you have to clearly demonstrate your measurable productivity impact and really just focus on those outcomes that your scientists are looking for and are being measured by. And so make sure that your value proposition, not only do you talk about like your features and your specs and this amazing novel data that you can capture, but really get down to the idea that they can move their science forward faster and more efficiently. That's going to be a part of the discourse with all of your customers. Okay, so just to wrap up in the last 2 minutes of our final thoughts, again, like we said, there's let's move on. And we'll stop at this slide here. More positive outlook in the market. We saw that by 13%. There's going to be steady purchasing. And remember, like 2025 was nothing to write home about, but then look at how many public companies actually saw a pretty decent growth. So there is continued to be steady purchasing. People are still not super excited, but there's going to be continued purchasing. And then this increased productivity is an unmistakable signal that we saw in our data set. So thank you all for joining. Thank you all for the great questions. If you have more questions that we didn't get to, please reach out to us and we're happy to share this. We also do provide specific cuts of this data to companies. We have a list of companies that pay us on a regular basis to get a cut of this data that's specific to them. So if that's of interest to you, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to do that. Thanks again, and may 2026 be amazing for all of you, and may this data play a little role in helping you shape that success. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.